Hello. I don't know why every time I speak into this, it always surprises me when it's supposed to be on. But anyway, thank you for joining us this evening, and welcome to Dallas Historical Society's Evening with Lecture Series. My name is Dia Berry Mitchell, and of course, you know me because I have the distinct pleasure of curating each of these wonderful exciting programs that we have, including this one this evening, our Evening With, and also the Brown Bag series. So if you haven't been to the Brown Bags, I encourage you to come to those as well. We have those at lunchtime at noon on the first Tuesday of the month, and our calendar is up to date. So we are so excited about tonight's program, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, with transportation experts, Bob LaPrelle and Ken Capps. Thank you both for being here this evening. Before we introduce our speakers for tonight, I wanted to remind you that although we encourage you to visit live in person with us, I know we have some who are going to be viewing this from Facebook. So if you're joining us from Facebook, thank you. But whenever you feel comfortable, make sure you get out and join us live and in person. If you'd ever like to catch any of these at your leisure, make sure that you just like us on Facebook at Dallas Historical Society. Follow us, and you'll be able to pull up any of our programming that you've missed. So feel free to join us. As a reminder, our June 1st Deep Vellum book series has been postponed, so no new date on that one yet, so stay tuned. So that makes our next event, our Brownback discussion, on June 7th. It's entitled Becoming Texans. It's a pictorial narrative from a fourth-generation Texan. That's the title of it. And this is an oral history and photography project that explores the lived experiences of Vietnamese immigrants and their families as they wove their cultural threads into the fabric of Dallas. That's going to be led by Professor Betsy Brody and Bird Williams, who is a fourth-generation Texan and also a fourth-generation photographer. So that should be interesting. So now on to tonight. This is a very exciting conversation with Bob LaPrelle, who is the president of the Museum of the American Railroad, located in Frisco, Texas now. So we're going to hear a little bit more about that. And also Mr. Ken Capps, a communications and aviation industry professional, who will share insight on how the city's infrastructure was shaped and molded by railroad industries, the development of major airports, and also briefly the impact of the automobile industry and what impact that had on Dallas's infrastructure. So Bob LaPrelle is a 30-year veteran in the field of historic railroad preservation and museums. He served as executive director and CEO of the Museum of the American Railroad since 1988, and then just prior to that, he was a board trustee member. Mr. LaPrelle has placed an emphasis on railroad museums and their role in communities as both educational resources, but also as tourism destinations. He also recently successfully led efforts to relocate the museum. So in case you didn't know, it was formerly here on campus at Fair Park. Raise your hand if you ever attended when it was here. You visited, I should say. Great. So make sure you get out to Frisco and visit them in the near future whenever you have a moment. So yeah, he successfully led the efforts to relocate the museum to a much larger venue, and I've heard great things about it. Next is Ken Capps. He is a native of Texas who began working in Dallas in 1985 as a broadcast journalist. And then later, during his TV career, he also covered the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger. So Mr. Capps parlayed his communication skills and his knowledge of aviation industry into the travel and transportation group at EDS. Ken's first day on the job as Vice President, Public Affairs at DFW International Airport was September 11th, 2001. So Capps was a team leader in the opening of the $2.5 billion International Terminal D and Skylink train, selling $1.5 billion in bonds to fund the new terminal, and then also bringing billions of dollars of new international air service to TFW. And I, for one, really appreciate that Skylink train, so thank you very much. So both of these men have many, many more accolades that I could stand here and go on and on about, but I'm sure you want to get to the programming. And so we're going to hear a little bit more about each of them tonight. So first, you're going to hear from Ken, and then next you'll hear from Bob separately about their industries. And then afterwards, they'll both join us on stage for a discussion, which will be led by our very own DHS Executive Director, Carl Chow. Want to say hello? He's seated over there in the corner. So before we get started, just please make sure you have your cell phones on silent, and we encourage you to take photos and share those with us by using the hashtag DHSEveningWith. And that is all. Make sure you reserve your questions for the end of the program. And thanks for joining us tonight.
Wow, it's such an honor to be here with you tonight, and I really want to thank Carl Chow and the Dallas Historical Society for inviting me, and Bob, because man, this is a really great topic for our city and for our region. And as Dia said, my first day on the job at DFW was September 11th. 2001. If there's time to get into that after the presentations, I can certainly talk about that. But I'm here to talk tonight about how we got to where we did with Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. And so I was trying to think of an appropriate title for this. And so, so what I came up with was Big Dreams. Whoops, did I mess that up? Big dreams, big personalities, big disagreements, and finally a big airport. And you'll see what I mean. So, the first airport in our area, this is Love Field, 1917. That was out in the country back then. And it was an Army military base. And as you can see, security was really tight right around there. And so it opened in 1917, and in 1918, you may have heard of this organization, the World Health Organization. Well, in 1918, they declared the Spanish flu a nationwide pandemic. And there are soldiers at Love Field getting their throat spray. That was the therapeutic for the Spanish flu back then. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Then we move over to, say this real quick. We're still over at Love Field. The city of Dallas buys this property in 1927. The runways are still dirt. And but it's commercial flights start. The runways are paved in the 30s, and so in the early 1930s, you have commercial air service coming out of Love Field. So Love Field does have the distinction of being the first airport in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But okay, I'm always bad at these things. Then we come across to the Fort Worth Airport. The airport in Fort Worth opened in 1925, and it was called Fort Worth Municipal Airport. The land, all 100 acres of it, was given to the city by former Mayor Meacham. So, a couple of years later, they thought, well, this will be nice. We will name the airport Meacham Field. And he also donated $125 out of his own pocket to build a house on the airport grounds, so there could be a watchman there before there was an air towers and things to kind of watch out for airplanes coming in. So so let me make sure I get this right. So yes, also in the 1930s, you had Dallas and you had Meacham and Love Field start having commercial flights. Well, back in the 30s, believe it or not, both cities started talking about building a joint airport. There was just one problem. They couldn't decide where to put it. Does this sound familiar? Okay, from just a few years ago? It's been going on 100 years, folks. They couldn't decide where to put it. So, there's a guy in Fort Worth, and again, I know you love him. His name is Amon Carter. You know, he owned all of Fort Worth back in the 30s and 40s. He owned the newspaper. His name's on the art museum. And he hated Dallas so much and distrusted Dallas so much that if he was forced to go over to Dallas, true story, people think it's an old wives' tale, but it's not. He would take his lunch in a brown bag, just like they have here at the Dallas Historical Society. And, right, Carl? Because he would not spend a nickel in Dallas if he could get by with it. So he ups the ante. When they moved the airport closer to where DFW is now, Fort Worth, of course, what was the name of it? Amon Carter Field. Hey, when you're Amon Carter, you can just name everything after yourself, right? But then he says, you know what we're going to do? We're going to call this airport Greater Southwest International Airport. Okay? And that was a real shot across the bow into Dallas County telling Southwest, you better back off, because we're going to be the international airport. We're going to be the big dogs, okay? Well, and of course, that didn't go over too well with over in Love Field, and Dallas felt the same way about Fort Worth, not trusting them, and but finally, in the early '60s, the Civil Aeronautics Board came together and said, look, Dallas and Fort Worth, we are not going to fund 2 airports anymore. Okay? So you guys are going to have to come up with a plan on where you're going to put an airport. And if you don't come up with a plan, we're going to come up with a plan. Okay? So here you've been fighting about it since the 30s. This has been going on for 35 years. And so they finally come up with the plan that is 17,000 acres, the size of the island of Manhattan, where DFW is today. So they signed the agreement in 1968. Construction began in 1969. And here you see the place going up. How many were around when DFW was starting to get built? Do y'all remember that? It was pretty exciting, wasn't it? No, it wasn't exciting? Well, it was pretty exciting for Dallas and Fort Worth, because what they knew and what our city founders knew was that this was going to change the face of our region, that this was going to end up being the economic engine for our region. And the decision that they made, just like the decision they were going to make right after 9/11, was the best gamble they ever made, because DFW is the economic engine of North Texas, has been since 1974, still is. When major corporations or new airlines come to our area, the first thing they talk about, and I'm a Dallas resident, okay, full disclosure, they don't say we're moving to Dallas-Fort Worth for Love Field. They say we're moving to Dallas-Fort Worth for DFW Airport, okay? So they build this wonderful airport, 4 terminals, and then it opens in January '74. Good afternoon.
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In behalf of the Regional Airport Board, staff of the board are real happy to welcome all of you to this groundbreaking ceremony, which is going to be the kickoff for the construction of the greatest airport in the world. We would also like to extend a particular welcome in behalf of the local citizens to those of you who have come from all parts of the United States to participate in this particular ceremony.
So this was quite a momentous occasion for DFW. Y'all remember that during that weekend it opened that the Concorde flew in, the SST? Okay, that was a very big deal. And Willie Nelson played the big party. Now, on the 30th anniversary of the airport in 2004, I went out and interviewed a bunch of people who were for our big party we had for the 30th anniversary of the airport, and I interviewed Willie Nelson. And I said, Willie, what do you remember about playing the opening of DFW? And his answer was pretty short, not much. That's a good Willie answer. So the airport's just cranking right along. I mean, it's a big hit. It's an instant big hit. And of course, here's my first train picture. The little train that could, AirTrans. Y'all remember that? Oh man. I grew up in Austin, and so a couple times we flew through DFW on trips from high school, and everybody just thought it was so fun back then to ride the train. Well, as you know, the train got ricketier and ricketier as time goes by. It was outside of security, so you would have to go out of the terminal and get on the train and then take the train to the next terminal and then go through security again. Now, security was not as tight, obviously, as it is now, but it was still a royal pain. And so when AirTrans went away in 2005, when Skylink came on, nobody really missed it. However, if you still really, really miss AirTrans, go over to the Frontiers of Flight Museum, and they have one of the cars right over there. So you can take a picture with it, you can climb in it, and remember the good old days. But then, Mr. Herb Kelleher comes along. And this is what I'm talking about with big personalities. So, Love Field stayed open. It did not close as the Civil Aeronautics Board mandated that it did. Southwest Airlines comes on the scene in 1971 and starts flying out of Love Field. Mr. Kelleher, being a lawyer himself, says, look, we didn't sign that 68 agreement saying that we weren't even here. So we're not moving out to DFW. Sorry. And so DFW immediately felt threatened that this new little airline was going to take business away from DFW. And Herb, of course, loved it because that's exactly what he wanted to do. So, but there was another big personality involved, and that would be Mr. Jim Wright. And he walks big and carries a big gavel, as you can see. So Jim Wright was not only a congressman from Fort Worth, but he was the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And he was one powerful dude. He says, well, okay, Southwest, by the way, they took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court agreed with Southwest that they could stay open and they could fly out of left field. So Speaker Wright says, all right, if you want to do that, here's what we're going to do. We're going to limit how many gates you can fly out of at left field. We're going to limit the cities you can fly out of left field, and we're going to cut back on the seats that you can have on your airplanes. You can only have 56 seats on an airplane. So he gets this through Congress, because remember, he's a powerful man. And here's the headline: interstate flights at Love Field illegal. So And as you guys know, if you've lived here for any stretch of time, this was a really, really sore subject for many, many years. It was always simmering on the back burner. It always went back and forth to court, back and forth to Congress, but it never got solved. And then what happened? 9/11. Okay? All of a sudden, the Wright Amendment went on the back burner. And at DFW that day, DFW has 7 runways. We're the only airport in the world that had 7 runways. They're also built to military specifications, so they are very long. So just like you saw in the play Come From Away, where in Gander they landed all those airplanes, on 2 runways. Well, we did the same thing here. And we had over 400 airplanes parked at DFW. There were 175,000 people on the airfield and in the terminals on 9/11. By the evening of 9/11, there were 0. Everybody was gone. It was the first time since the day the airport opened that the airport was completely empty of people. And I stood there that night with our VP of Public Safety and watched the dirt and the newspapers fly through there just like a wind tunnel. It was so eerie and weird. DFW, like everybody else, was kind of like, now what do we do? Well, there I am. That's a great story for later. So that was me on my first day, But so now what do we do? DFW had already broken ground on our new International Terminal D, which was a $2.5 billion project. And the board, Dallas and Fort Worth, had both voted on it, and it didn't look like that on 9/11. It was a big hole in the ground. And so it was really fascinating to be a part of this in the months and the year after 9/11. The board had to decide, do we fill up this big hole in the ground and call it a day, or do we keep building? When the economy is terrible, when the future of air travel is very uncertain, and just like when the board decided to get together and Dallas and Fort Worth finally pulled their heads out and built DFW Airport, our board back then decided to go on and build International Terminal D. And once again, it was one of the biggest gambles and one of the biggest wins for this area. And it opened in 2005. And this dramatically brought in so much new international business and air traffic to DFW. And I just threw that in there because that was when my son Austin was a kid, and so he was, when you get to be the kid of a guy like me, we went inside the terminal before it opened, and so we got to kind of play around in there. He's now out of college and doing his own thing. And there's another train. This is Skylink opened. And thank you for whoever said they liked Skylink, because it really changed everything. That now it's all inside the secure area of the airport. You can go to all 5 of the terminals without having to navigate security. It's very fast, and it's considered the best airport train in the world. And as I close up, after all of that mayhem, the next big expansion for the airport, and what was a priority for Dallas and Fort Worth, was bringing DART to the airport, as well as TexRail. And so finally, Dallas and Fort Worth got together and decided to work a little bit closely. But I close on this slide because I really like it. This is a slide. This is not a stage slide. This was taken on the day the airport opened in the prairie. You see the SST down there. You see this airplane, and there's a boy riding straight down the middle of the Dallas-Tarrant County line on his horseback, and that's supposed to represent DFW Airport bringing the towns, the cities of Dallas and Fort Worth, out of the prairie, out of the old, and into the new. And, who knows what's ahead for our airport. There's still talk of building a Terminal F, which would be the 6th terminal. And, but I'll just tell you this right now, and I've talked to several people in the audience. Fort Worth has always felt shafted in this deal. Okay, they've always felt like they've gotten the short end of the stick to Dallas, that they have given up more in this relationship. And so I thought this was funny that on April Fool's, they decided to name the airport Fort Worth Dallas International Airport. So thank you for letting me share. I'm looking forward to hearing Bob, and I'm happy to take your questions afterward. Thank you very much.
How's that? Much better. All right. So Ken kind of segued into the railroad aspect of things at the end of his program. Thank you. And what a lot of people don't know is we actually have the companion AirTrans vehicle at our museum up in Frisco. When the LTV folks approached us about preserving it, it was a little bit far afield from their aviation side of things, so we gladly took it. It's fixed guideways, so it kind of fits what we do. So let's go back a few years. Let's go back to the first economic engine for Dallas-Fort Worth, okay? Friendly rivalry there. Let's see. All right. There we go. So let me tell you a little bit about the Museum of the American Railroad before we get into some of the Dallas Railroad history, because we had 50 great years here at Fair Park. And our museum now is 60 years old, and it has a history of its own, and I wanted to touch on that a little bit. Let's see if we can do this here. Okay, just a real quick rundown of our mission. We really talk about all the aspects of the railroad industry and how it affected American life and culture. We talk about it at the local level, we talk about it at the national level, and our collection is national in scope. So a lot of you may remember when we were here at Fair Park, we had a very small little postage stamp footprint. It was about 1.8 acres, and we were just bursting at the seams here. We actually had several pieces of our collection stored off-site over at the old Ford assembly plant over here on Grand Avenue, and we really liked Fair Park, we liked Dallas, but we were just bursting at the seams, and we were expanding our educational programs, growing our collection, and something had to give. We did a strategic plan in 2006, and they told us what we already knew. We needed to change venues, and we needed to look at a much more professional, viable, and sustainable environment for this museum if it was going to survive. There we go. So this is what it looks like today. We are on almost 15 acres in Frisco now. We will have laid over a mile of track within that 15-acre facility. The Dallas North Tollway extension is up running along the upper portion of the slide here. And then the BNSF railway that comes from Dallas and goes all the way up to Sherman and up into Oklahoma is the major rail line. So it made perfect sense. I love Fair Park. I had 25 years in here, and Fair Park is one of my favorite places in North Texas, and I really miss it. But it made sense for us to do this. We moved up here at the invitation of the city of Frisco. We had about a year's worth of discussions with them. We went back and forth with Dallas, but this made the most sense for us to move up here. And we just haven't looked back. We're working very closely with the school district up there. We have quite a bit of engagement in the community up there. But what we do like to say is we didn't leave Dallas, we just moved to Frisco. We can still consider this our market. It's very important for us. Right now we're at the point, if I can use the, we're at the point of, what did I do? There we go. We just finished laying these additional tracks right here. We will have 10 tracks side by side, and we are now up to 65 cars and locomotives in our collection, a lot more than we had here at Fair Park. We continue to preserve the different aspects of railroad history and technology and add to the collection as we go. We work very closely with the school district, so it's been a good move. It's been great for us, and we're very happy we did it, but we do miss Fair Park. Just a little bit showing our future. Once we finish all the trackage and the infrastructure, then we will actually start coming out of the ground with construction. These are some renderings of our main building and what it could look like. This was done by an architect firm out of Chicago, and this is based on the original old Grand Central Station in Chicago, not the one in New York, but the one in Chicago. Beautiful building, and we really like some of the architectural elements of it. Is our head house and museum building. Okay. Just some more of the renderings. We're very excited about these, the possibility of building such a grand structure. And this is a artist's rendering of what it would look like on the inside. So very exciting. All of these are pieces in our collection we already have. This would be the inside of the train shed. It's about 120,000 square foot covered structure that's period style that protects the collection from the elements and provides visitor-friendly experience inside. It's just beyond the actual main building. So it would be quite an interior and quite a fitting place to display these trains and celebrate their history and their heritage. All right, let's talk a little bit about railroad history in Dallas. Really, Dallas is the metropolis that it is today because of the railroads. And this city was no larger than some of the other surrounding cities at the time, but the Houston and Texas Central Railroad was building north from Houston in the early 1870s. There had been some railroad construction before the Civil War, around Galveston and Houston, down around Henderson. That basically came to an end during the Civil War, and then it resumed after the war and during Reconstruction. But it was a while before they actually started building north. The Houston and Texas Central line started about 1870, 1871. And as the railroad approached North Texas, there was some discussion and some wrangling about where the first east-west line was going to cross that railroad. The H&TC was building north from Houston to the Red River, and there was already discussion about where there was going to be an intersection of another railroad going east-west. And there was quite a bit of wrangling in the Texas legislature. There was quite a bit of finagling in how the railroads had to follow Texas law. One was that the legislature required every railroad that built in Texas to incorporate in Texas. And it was brilliant because a lot of the lines who were building from outside the state all of a sudden were accountable to the state of Texas, and a lot of the commerce was going to be captured by that. So the Houston and Texas Central Railroad was really being built by the Southern Pacific Railroad out in Los Angeles. It spanned all the way from Los Angeles to New Orleans, but it had to have subsidiaries in Texas. So there was the H&TC and the Texas and New Orleans line. And another great scheme from local politicians was when they started talking about where the east-west line was going to cross. The law said it had to cross the H&TC, which arrived in Dallas in 1872. It had to cross within 1 mile of Browder Springs. Y'all probably know this story. And nobody knew where Browder Springs was, so it wasn't contentious in the legislature. They just kind of slipped that one in, and no one knew where it was. Well, it was just a few miles from the center of Dallas. And so when the Texas and Pacific line was building westward from Texarkana, it had to pass right through Browder Springs. And that's what happened in 1873. And let's see. So this is, let's see if I can point this. This is the H&TC line right here that built through Dallas originally. And then this is the Texas and Pacific line that came in 1873. They ran out of money in 1873 because there was an economic panic at that point, and the railroad came to a halt somewhere around the mid-cities, and literally the citizens of Fort Worth chipped in to finish the railroad and build it on into Fort Worth. And after the panic, it continued on westward all the way eventually to El Paso to make a connection with the Southern Pacific line, which made it a transcontinental route right through Dallas. But it took a couple of years to get it there. This became known as the Railroad Reservation, and there was a lot of structures. Obviously, you know, cotton came to this location here to be loaded onto the railroads. It opened up lines down to Galveston for cotton to be exported. Cotton went down to the port of Galveston, and it increased Dallas, you know, from a standpoint of cotton production and commerce immensely. And then the H&TC continued on and connected with the Missouri, Kansas, Texas line at the Red River. And the interesting thing about that story is when the H&TC was building to the Red River and the Katy was coming down through Indian Territory, they didn't meet at the same place. And they started squabbling over who was going to build a town just this side of the Red River, because there was a lot of commerce to be had there as well. Tom Smith, you all may know Tom Smith, who's a great historian here in Dallas, tells a great story that for a couple of years, the railroads didn't connect, and they had to transfer all that freight and all those passengers between those rail lines that were less than a mile apart. And Dallas finally got fed up with that, because it was killing commerce coming down from the north, from St. Louis and Kansas City and all those northern production points, having to transload all that and pay fees and tariffs and all of these things. And finally, the city of Dallas said, if you all don't figure that out up there, we're going to come up there and figure it out for you. So it was going to, I think it was going to be Red River City, and then finally they got together and built the rail lines together, established the town of what is known as Denison today. But it's really a very interesting story. So the TMP progressed westward to Fort Worth, and then what they call the Baird subdivision went all the way out to El Paso, and then you got all your transcontinental traffic through here. So this was a major rail intersection right here. Let's see, that is right about I-45 and Pacific Avenue. In fact, Pacific Avenue gets its name from the Texas and Pacific Railroad. And you had yards in here. You had what's called a Y, so they could change directions of the trains. And I think I may have just passed it. I had, let's see, I had the populations. I had that up just a moment ago. Let's see if I can do it. Yes, okay. So you can really see what it did for Dallas. And the thing about it is McKinney or Ennis, you know, just to pick a few places, could have easily have been a metropolis instead of Dallas, but it was because of these two rail lines coming together. So you can see what it did, the dramatic increases in population there, and what it did for this city. These maps are kind of hard to see from up here. So more railroads built into Dallas, and the H&TC line, you know, went all the way up through Collin County and all the way up to Sherman and Denison. Then you brought in the Cotton Belt Railroad, the Frisco, the Burlington, the Rock Island. All these railroads came into Dallas, and what was the very source of prosperity and growth in Dallas began to choke the city, because you had all these rail lines coming into the central business district. And what started out as the great, you know, railroad construction era and the boom of Dallas was became known as the railroad problem for Dallas. And there were trains just all up and down city streets here. So what they ended up doing, let's see. You had originally 5 train stations in Dallas, and this is actually a photograph of a wonderful display that is at Dallas Union Station on the wall downstairs, showing all the different railroad depots prior to Union Station. The Katy had their own. Some were shared depots, the Texas and Pacific, the Cotton Belt, Santa Fe, and then what was called the East Dallas Depot, which was the H&TC depot. And if you had to change trains, you had to go from one station to the next. So, let's see. I'm sure you all are familiar with the Kessler Plan for Dallas. One of the major things the Kessler Plan was supposed to do was to solve the railroad problem and what was going on in this city. It dealt with a lot of other things like pushing the levee back, but the main recommendation that the Kessler Plan had for the city of Dallas are really two recommendations for the railroads. One was to build a Union Station and close all those passenger depots that ring the city and get the rail lines out of the central business district, because back in those days, passenger was as big as freight in the rail industry. And the other was to build a belt railroad around the southern part of the city, so all those trains could get off those busy downtown streets. And the Kessler Plan provided for that in detail. Okay. So the result of that, and this is kind of my area of expertise, the result of that is they went to the railroads and they said, look, you've got to help us with this problem. This is choking the city. And the railroads at first were very reluctant to invest any more money in their infrastructure in the city. Well, that's your problem. You have to figure out how to deal with that. But they finally got the railroads together with the city leaders. George Dealey was involved in that. He was a big proponent of railroads early on and getting the railroads here in here in Dallas, but he's also a proponent of what to do about keeping the city from being choked by the railroads. So they got together and created the Union Terminal Company, and there were 8 railroads that got together to form that company and build this new station. And it was going to be on the west edge of town. They're going to push the levees back as part of the Kessler Plan and build this Union Terminal with all new trackage. It wasn't just the building, which still stands today. It's a magnificent structure. The building is just one little part of the Union Terminal Company and that whole complex. They had to build miles of trackage and signaling systems and yards and turntables and approach towers and dispatching and everything else. It is a huge piece of infrastructure. A lot of it is still there today. A powerhouse. They generated their own electricity. So the Union Terminal was one of the great ways that they were to solve the railroad problem in Dallas. And it opened in October of 1916. The other depots were closing. It took a little while to consolidate all that rail traffic and close all those depots. But as you probably know, they're all gone today. There are no survivors. They were beautiful buildings. So Union Terminal was a very, very busy place. I mean, it really was the center of Dallas. It was the gateway to Dallas. It was the front door to Dallas. And the civic leaders worked very closely with the railroads in the design and construction of Union Terminal. And what the city leaders wanted, besides getting the trains out of the central business district, was a modern, impressive front door to Dallas. And Union Terminal really did satisfy that need. And when they opened it, this is interesting, and when they opened it in 1916, all the city leaders got up and told the rest of the city, don't complain anymore about the railroads. They have cooperated, they have invested in this, no more bashing the railroads, let's be friendly to them. I always thought that was very interesting. This is about 1950. These are 2 of the main premier trains that served the station. That's the Southern Pacific's Sunbeam, which was a fast train down to Houston. And this is the Burlington's Sam Houston Zephyr, which was another competitor. There were many, many arrivals and departures in and out of Union Station for a number of years. We have thousands of photographs and maps and supporting material on that station. It really is, it could be its own story. This is an interesting slide. This is surveying along the Houston and Texas Central line just north of downtown in preparation for building Central Avenue. Central Avenue ran right along the H&TC line and what is now Central Expressway. That's where it gets its name, all the way up to Mockingbird. So this is an interesting map here. This is 1944, and it shows, this is downtown right here, it shows the railroad basically severed here at Pacific Avenue, right down through the heart of downtown Dallas. So what the Kessler Plan provided for was all the trains coming in from the north and all the trains coming in from the south used the Union Terminal trackage right here. The station building was right here. And none of these trains could go through Dallas anymore. They built a belt railroad. So the Dallas belt runs down this way and around and back up. And that's how they rerouted all the trains around Dallas. So all the southbound trains went around part of the belt down this way, but all the trains that had to go, most of the trains that had to go north had to go around the belt. This is way down around Lamar Street. Fair Park is right here. There was a junction here for the T&P. So the T&P would come in from Fort Worth, go through Union Station, make their stops, go around the belt, and then get back on the original T&P alignment and go east in this direction right here. Part of the T&P remained in place because there was a roundhouse and a yard called Gaston Yard, which is where the apartments are now. That roundhouse remained in use, I think, until the late 40s. And finally, the line started getting truncated almost all the way back now to this point. And then they built another roundhouse at where the Ford plant was. That's already been demolished as well. But this is now a Union Pacific main line. They use it every day. It's a very busy railroad. And then the BNSF comes in from the north. Amtrak comes in on the TRE in this direction, still uses Union Station. So there's still a lot of rail activity on here. I can't overemphasize enough that the railroads still play a very, very important role to the Metroplex. They're still very relevant. In fact, they're moving more ton miles today than they ever had, well, when the economy was a little bit better than in their history. And you know, they still bring most of the aggregate into this part of the state to produce concrete. They move a lot of bulk materials. So this is the, this is interesting. This is the marker that was put in place not that long ago to commemorate where the junction of the two railroads were in Dallas. This is right underneath the I-45 overhead. We were there for the commissioning of this, and it disappeared within about 18 months. So it's not there anymore. In fact, Robert Wolonsky asked us if we had a photograph of it, and I said, yes, we do. We were there. It would be nice, and I think there's an original marker here at the Dallas Historical Society that was there many years ago, as I understand it. But it would be nice if we could replace this somehow and protect it. All right. So that's essentially it. I got the 5-minute mark. That was a very broad brush of railroads in North Texas. It really was the first economic engine. The steam engine was the first economic engine. And come and see us at the museum up in Frisco. We would love to meet you and show you around up there. And I'm a huge fan of aviation too, so I enjoyed that, Ken, as well. And thank you to everybody at the Dallas Historical Society, Dia, and everybody for having me come. It was great. Appreciate it.
All right. Still on. Ken, get you to sit down here with us. As Dee had mentioned, I'm going to stick this here. My name is Carl Chow. I'm the executive director, and we're so excited to have Ken and Bob here this evening. Just wanted to kind of follow up with your wonderful presentation with a few questions, and then we'll go to the audience. This was supposed to be an automotive component to this, and we did not have our automotive expert, but you had mentioned the Ford plant. So can you give us some background, kind of how the automotive world started around here?
Well, Dallas, you know, was very much an automotive city as well, and still is. The Ford company, I know a lot about this plant because we had some rail cars stored in there because it had tracks that went in there. You know, I know Ford Motor Company was assembling automobiles in the Adam Hatt building, you know, before it was that. And the Model Ts would come in sub-assemblies, and then they would put them together in that building. And then I think it was in 1927, 28, when the Model A's were introduced, that this plant opened, and it was one of the more significant plants in the whole Ford system. And so it's very successful in Model A construction, and then they went into building, I think, automobiles, 1949, 50 Fords, and trucks as well in that plant. It closed in '69, I remember that. It was a huge customer for the Texas and Pacific Railroad because they had raw materials coming in and then the finished cars going out on auto racks. So it was a busy place until they closed it in 1969. It's now a storage building, but they were nice enough to let us use their indoor tracks to store some of our more sensitive pieces in our collection that needed to be protected from the weather.
Thank you very much. And I also know that GM had a plant that was in Dallas for a while, and then in the late 1950s, early 1950s, they built the Arlington plant. So, Chevrolet's been building cars here for a while as well.
Yes.
Now, Ken, I've known you for a while, sir, and I know your story about 9/11. And if you would tell the audience, I mean, that is just one of the most amazing stories of what happened on that day. If you'll kind of go into that.
Okay, well, I'll try to make it quick. So on that, 9/11 was on a Tuesday. And so on the Thursday and Friday before 9/11, I was at the airport, and those guys just put me through the most grueling interview process. I mean, I interviewed with so many people, and when I left out of there on Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock, I had no idea whether I had done good or not. I really, really didn't. And, but I wanted that job so much. It was just, I was a reporter at Channel 4 for a long time, and it just, with my love of aviation and being a reporter, it was just the perfect job for me. And so, but what do? It's out of your control. And so Monday, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I get a call from the airport, and they offered me the job. And so I gave the standard, that's great, let me think about it, let me talk to my family, blah, 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 And so the next morning, I'm taking my son Austin to, the morning of 9/11, I'm taking my son Austin to daycare, and the first plane hits Tower 1. And so I'm like, And of course, at the beginning, they thought it was a small plane. And but I got on my phone and called the guy who had called me on Monday, got his voicemail, and I said, look, if you guys need me to come in, I'll be right there. Well, then the second plane hit Tower 2. So I just put on my suit and went in. And as I'm rounding the corner to the DFW admin building, they called me back and said, boy, we'd love for you to come in. I said, I'm right here. So as I'm walking through the door, this guy grabs me, and now remember, I haven't negotiated a salary or anything. So this guy walks me into this room, wants me to sign this piece of paper. I'm like, oh God, what am I? It was my life insurance policy. Seriously, they wanted to make sure I had life insurance because nobody knew what the heck was going on. And so what is so ironic about that day was there in the morning, that same table with the same whiteboard where all of the executives were grilling me on Friday afternoon. Now I'm the guy standing at the top of the whiteboard asking them, okay, so what are we've got all of the cameras at DFW Administration Building because a lot of the media thought that was American Airlines, okay? But they were still at DFW. So I said to them, okay, there's a lot of things that we don't know. What do we know that we can communicate? Dead silence in the room. And then somebody finally popped up and said, well, we're opening all of the parking gates and not charging anybody, so everybody can just get out of here. I said, that's great. And so by the time we were done, we had like 3 talking points that we could go out and give to the local and the national reporters. And, again, being a reporter myself, as long as you're feeding the news beast, they're happy. It's when you don't give them anything or they think you're hiding something, that's when things get bad. So that was going well, and then I'm sure you guys have seen all the documentaries about 9/11. You remember at noon there was that conference call with the FAA with all the airports around the country. Well, the guy who was the head of the FAA that was in charge of that was also his first day on the job.
Oh my God.
I want to meet him. And But so, remember, I don't have any security clearance. I don't have anything. And so one of the executives took me by my lapel, by these guys with their machine guns, and says, "He's with me," and jerks me into this room. And I mean, literally, it was surreal to think that I'd gotten out of bed this morning, and by noon, all this was going on, and then nobody on that call knew what was going on, and there was still one plane missing in the airspace that did not have its transponder on. So they were very worried that there was still one more plane to go. And it just kept going all day. We kept doing news conferences, and like I said, by the end of that day, 175,000 people that were supposed to be somewhere else that day were out of DFW Airport. There was not a rent-a-car left at the airport. The receptionist worked in my department in public affairs. She remembers somebody's calling her and saying, "How do you get to Cleveland from here?" You know, this is before the days of GPS and everything, right? And then, like I say, I closed the day standing in Terminal C, just watching these 40-mile-an-hour wind gusts come through because there's nobody in there blowing newspapers and everything, and just thinking, wow, you know. But I tell you, I'll just say this and close. I gained more respect that day for going in with my bosses than I would have ever gained in years. And I was glad I was there. I mean, you know, as a reporter, I like to be in the middle of the action. And I was really glad I was there because I felt like we were helping people because people were scared. Wasn't everybody in this room scared? I mean, there were reports that there was going to be planes hitting down the buildings in downtown Dallas, for Pete's sake. Y'all remember that? So there was a lot of information that was wrong that was going around out there. So I felt like my job was to put out information that was right. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you very much, Ken. Okay, so on the train industry, Bob, there's been a lot of talk about a high-speed train between Dallas and Houston.
Yes.
Where are we on that, and how do you see that playing out? Is that going to happen?
You know, I think there is a good possibility that it will. We have foreign investment in high-speed rail now, so there is money there where there hasn't been before. The only high-speed line that we really have in this country right now is Amtrak's Northeast Corridor between Washington, New York, and Boston. And these days it's kind of medium speed. And I think there is a market for a downtown to downtown conveyance that can get you there without all of the transportation, you know, between the outlying airports and the central business district. And I think there is enough of a market to support all modes of transportation, but I think it's got a future here. And I think from the standpoint of time and the ease of getting in and out of the central business districts of, say, Houston and Dallas, and eventually the triangle between San Antonio and Austin, I think it's viable. And once they can get the land issues sorted out, that's the big issue right now, of course. And I know I would use it. And also it's safe and it's clean. So I think it's got a good future.
Is there a reason why the U.S. doesn't have a system like that already, like the rest of Europe or other countries?
Yes. I think you get into issues of public policy. And, you know, I think that we have invested heavily in our highways and our airports and our airways. And, you know, the railroads for the long time were their own worst enemy. You know, it was the first regulated industry. That's where you got the Interstate Commerce Commission, and railroads went from being, you know, a great conveyance that brought the nation together to being hated and despised because they controlled just about everything, including our time zones. They created that. A lot of people thought, how dare the railroads tell us when we're going to follow certain, you know, time in our lives. But I think that, you know, you will see a resurgence in that. over
Good,
time.
I hope so. It's
Yes, Amtrak, you know, it kind of has a foothold in it. I think you will see more high-speed rail, but it's going to require private investment. I don't think it's going to see a lot of public investment. You know, the freight railroads rule in this country. They move more ton miles than just about any other mode of transportation. When you get into passenger rail, it gets a lot more complicated.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Ken, you talked about the Wright Amendment, but you didn't tell us about how it ended and kind of the effects that it had on this area of Texas. So can you go a little bit more in detail about the Wright Amendment and what happened to it?
Like I said, after 9/11, you know, people kind of forgot about the Wright Amendment for 2 or 3, 4 years, but then it was right back in front of Congress, and as I told a couple of people in the audience, we at DFW thought that we really had the best economic argument. But when you've got Herb Kelleher on the other side, he had the best emotional and people argument. So in 2006, the Wright Amendment was repealed. It was not repealed completely. It was finally repealed in 2014. And I tell you, both sides, I think, got it wrong. What has happened is that, you know, all ships have risen as a result of the Wright Amendment being lifted. DFW is now the second busiest airport in the world, okay, 62 million passengers a year. It's the third busiest airport in the world with over 260 destinations. More international airlines came to DFW after the Wright Amendment was lifted. And of course, Southwest Airlines went from being this little bitty airline that everybody thought was kind of cute and served peanuts and everything. Now they're the #1 air carrier in the country. They're bigger than American. And they're doing great. You know, you can fly to Hawaii out of Love Field. You can fly to Mexico out of Love Field. So I think both sides got it wrong. And now, as I was telling this gentleman out here, and both airports are almost at capacity again. And they, as you may have seen, McKinney now has air service from McKinney to Washington Reagan. Okay, that would never have happened when I was at DFW. DFW would have kiboshed that so soon, but I mean, this area is just growing so wildly, and we should all be very grateful for that, even in these, you know, these terrible times, that we're still, that people want to come live and work. And so, you know, everybody thought it was going to be doom and gloom for DFW, and who knows what's going to happen to Southwest. It's actually been good for everybody.
Great. Well, thank you all very much for coming out tonight. Like I said, we do regular programming here, and Dia does a great job of putting this on. And please get on our website, dallashistory.org, and see what our next event is. And if you can't join us in person, please join us online. And have a safe trip home. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.